Hello, Size Fest. I am excited to be reading to you today from Dayton, Ohio. My name is Meredith Doench, and I'm going to be reading from Deadeye, which is the third book in my Loose Hansen series, and this one's about a serial sniper. I'm going to be reading from chapter 1, so this doesn't really need much of a setup. All you really need to know is that Hansen and her partner Bennett are on a much-needed vacation over Thanksgiving weekend at a resort near Charleston, South Carolina. The sun sank low on the South Carolina horizon. I leaned back in my seat, let the paddle rest across my lap, and welcomed that familiar bump of Harper Bennett's kayak against mine. The ocean resort directed us to a small inlet where the water shimmered with the evening calm and views of the sunset burned an array of colors. Bennett and I had settled into a silence as the water gently rocked us. This, I thought, was the true measure of trust with another person, how long that comfortable silence could hold. When the sun became only a burning orange sliver, Bennett said, "I've been meaning to check in with you, with us." Bennett worried that my work as a serial killer profiler for the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation would eventually lead to my demise. My work always had a way of digging its hooks into me, of gripping tight my mind, body, and soul in a way that made my breath quicker, my heartbeat stronger. Nothing, absolutely nothing else had ever made me feel more alive than the hunt for a serial killer and the need for justice. I won't be that woman who stands by her partner's grave after she has been murdered by some senseless idiot while on the job, Bennett said. I'm not going to be that sobbing widow who they hand the flag to, the one who nearly faints when the blank shots fire from the gun salute. Ben, that's not going to happen. I reached across our kayaks for her hand, but you can't promise that. I squeezed her hand. I also can't promise I won't die of a heart attack, a car wreck, or cancer. My air raid siren ringtone screamed, the one I'd assigned to all work-related calls. For a second, both of us froze. Then Bennett hollered, "You brought your phone on the water? What about our rule?" I hated the rule, and I regularly defied it. Floating time, according to Bennett, was unplugging time. No phones, no music, no texting or email checking. The world can wait, she always told me, at least until we come in from the water. It's not a safe rule, Bennett, I said, reaching for the phone. Something could happen. You're a special agent and I'm a doctor, she said. Who else could we possibly need in an emergency? The phone siren screamed again. I didn't want to argue, but this mattered. It mattered a lot because of Marcy Tucker. I'd struggled long and hard with the effects of PTSD since I'd missed my first love's murder by minutes. Her body still warm and bludgeoned inside a cave where we regularly met. It was the moment on which everything in my life hinged, the moment that defined me. I know that terrible kind of mayhem that can go down in nature without access to phones, I said. Death won't wait for a 911 call. Bennett looked away as the story of my past washed over us. We didn't talk much about Marcy, yet she was frequently there, a ghost I couldn't shake. Hansen, I said into the phone. Gobble gobble, Colby Sanders gave a sad attempt at a joke, and I suddenly missed my co-director at BCI. I hope you're having a good Thanksgiving down there, Hansen, but we need you. There's been a prison break at Hartford Correctional. My mind turned over everything I knew about the Ohio prison. High security, older facility, some disturbing reports of officer violence on inmates. Please tell me this has nothing to do with Deadeye, I said. His silence on the other end of the line told me it did. He's a high-risk inmate, I said. How could this even happen? A transport situation and a lot of help from the outside, Sanders told me. I pressed the heel of one hand against my forehead where a headache teased me. Holidays tended to be a time on prison campuses when officials let their guard down, when fewer eyes focused on the inmates. Clearly, I wasn't the only one who knew that secret. How long has he been gone? 4 hours, Sanders said. Search teams are combing the area. As Sanders went on about flight details out of Charleston, I thought about Deadeye. The serial predator had been hunting humans long before I joined the BCI and was finally apprehended in southeast Ohio after murdering at least 6 victims, hunter-style, in the expansive rural areas of Simmons County. Deadeye was better than a good shot. Generally, the victims were taken with a single bullet through the head, and he always removed and took with him the victims' blood-stained shirts, his trophy of death. Deadeye loose on the streets was more than dangerous. It was explosive. Hanson? Sanders said, "You with me?" I blinked myself back into focus. "I'll see you in a few hours." I looked out over the glass calm water. The evening breeze felt good against my face. "Hanson," Bennett said, "what's going on?" "It's Deadeye," I said. "He's on the lam." I handed her my paddle and then rolled away from her, the weight of my body spinning the kayak upside down. Salty water enveloped me as I slipped out of the kayak and let my body sink into its cool, thick darkness. And I'll stop there. Thank you for having me as a part of the Saints and Sinners reading series. Be well, everyone.
Hello, I'm T.S. Leonard. I'm a proud finalist for the Saints and Sinners Poetry Festival this year, and I'm joining you virtually from Portland, Oregon. Thrilled to be here for the 2021 Saints and Sinners Literary Festival. And I'll be reading two poems today from my chapbook, Reverse Cowboy. I released at the end of 2020. Two poems on the theme of love, and queer love in particular. This first poem is sort of an imagined interaction during the worst years of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it's from the perspective of someone who lost a close person that could be their lover or could be their dear friend, their good Judy. And I hope that it speaks to a fundamental kind of queer love that was really cemented in those years and that we're still carrying with us today. And the name of this poem is River Phoenix. Your favorite actor died today, too young, but so are you, rightfully tantruming against pricks, pins, and needles, every string you can pull, the fibrous final tethers, keeping you in this ungodly room with me, here forever, the 1st of November in 1993. But later, I will imagine what could come next. If you were to rip free from your failing machinery and rise up in your gown, now glowing, floating, only for your hot feet to hit the linoleum running, you say, "Let's get the hell out of here," and we're off. Flashing by untouched dinner trays and yesterday's paper ghosts, I've never seen you so fast. Already dated corkboard past the dying and the just born, bounding whole wards. I'm trying to keep up, flying through the waiting room to tumble after you and out the sliding doors. Memory jog over our pillaged blocks, and we run this town where we came up dancing. We are now the most alive living boys this city has ever seen. You, redding, trailing wires, ginger graceful and evading the fallen bluebirds scattered on the quiet concrete, and we still make it to the water's edge with all our old haunts we rush past behind us. Your sudden wings whisk the rampart and we stop on heel. You, panting, looking finally at the long blue and glancing back for a split second, half grin. But even in this version, I can't catch you. She shuts your eyes and I walk home alone to our stoop, the candy bowl with your sign, "Take as many as you want," emptied. And it's the same one I used to carry you the day to that very river when we let you go. And just then, the wind picks up. All right, this last poem I'll be reading is also from Reverse Cowboy. It is called Love Song. And Reverse Cowboy was really a collection inspired by my Midwestern roots, by images of the West and our myths of masculinity. And so when I think of queer love and specifically loving men, it's something about that mythic masculinity and how those roles are sort of challenged and shifting. And so this is a love song for that, and it's titled Love Song. The man I love will be a mother-fucking monster, a milky sea with a heart the size of a whale, a whole season of a person. He'll change. He will be my sister, in the sense that our love makes him cry easily. Like us, across the Badlands watching clouds break, the man I love will be a storm. He'll form, he'll fury, and I will remain a prairie. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Michael Lowenthal. I'm going to be reading from my brand new book, Sex with Strangers, which is a story collection I'm going to read the beginning of the last story, which is called The Gift of Travel. I'll read just the first few pages of that. And I'd like to dedicate this reading to the late John Preston, who was my inspiration for one of the main characters in the story. The Gift of Travel. Jim kept saying he wanted to take a last blast trip together. His treat, just the two of us, my first chance to venture beyond New England. He was in hock to hospitals in Maine and Massachusetts. He'd maxed out his credit cards on smuggled Mexican meds, but he was sitting on 97,000 Delta miles, enough to take us somewhere with a strong, restoring sun. He'd hoarded the miles in the past few years before he got too sick to fly, hopping from campus to campus with his retrospective lecture, Filthy as Fuck, A Faggot Writer's Life. This was 1993. In the newly rising queer studies programs at Duke, Yale, et al., suddenly it was in to be outrageous. Did Jim truly think the trip was anything but a pipe dream? Think that he could clamber out of his frailness back to passable health and someday might jet away again? Probably not, but keep in mind his forte was erotica, his plots, like most of their genre, adamantly implausible. When I would play along with Jim's vision of a trip, I wasn't exactly trying to humor him, more like trying to buffer him from the truth. I hadn't yet wondered if he was trying to buffer me. Picture it, Ben, he mused one day as I prepared to flush his Hickman catheter. Copacabana at sunset, my wise and worldly cock inside your twinky little bum. Sure, I said, swabbing the lumen's end with alcohol. Sounds delicious. I'll accept the last part. Ouch, he cried. The catheter site was purplish and crepey. Had I stung Jim's skin or his pride? Still so stingy, Ben, he said. Still? When I'm dying? Jesus, don't you want me to die happy? I want for you not to die, I said, but maybe he didn't hear me. Tell me this isn't about your pledge to Thomas, he said. St. Thomas, martyr for the cause of monogamy. Thomas was my boyfriend, or had been for 5+ years since we were college freshmen. 9.5 weeks ago, he'd moved to San Francisco to take a wetlands restoration position at Point Reyes, but really to put a continent between us, a trial separation, while Thomas considered my bid to win him back. No, said Jim. Ah, I see. It's me. Then, Ma, he barked, turning to Betty, who sat in the bedside armchair. Ma, can you believe this kid's cruelty? His mother eyed him over her bifocals. Oh, Jimmy, she said, her voice plump with disapproval, as though he'd asked for a second bowl of pudding. Then this Republican, former librarian of Brockton, Massachusetts, this rock-ribbed, churchy-voiced, octogenarian widow said, leave him be, for heaven's sake. He doesn't want your cock. Betty was right. But the problem wasn't that Jim was dying or what he was dying of. I hadn't wanted him even before the AIDS had gone full blown. Nor was it that he was unalluring. When he was healthy, Jim had had a thrillingly hard handsomeness, and even now, eroded to the essence of himself, even now, he sizzled with charisma. His pebbly eyes, the plow blades of his jaw. Who could resist the scrumptious clash between his courtly looks and his smutty disposition? I could, apparently. Jim had published a story of mine in one of his anthologies, a show of faith in a fresh from college writer. This led to flirty postcards, then a phone friendship. He lived in Portland, Maine, I in Boston, and finally to his hiring me as an assistant. I answered correspondence, managed his speaking gigs. I had told him early on, when he said he had to fuck me, that I thought it was better if we kept our bond professional, except the word I fumbled for was clean. A dirty fag writer and you want to keep things clean, he'd said? I'm not sure you're even teachable. Whenever I'd mentioned Thomas, our snug equilibrium, which I'd had no intention until I did it, of upsetting, Jim would rant about our prudish, thankless generation. This is why we marched and sat in those jail cells? This for your right to be such boring marrieds? I loved those rants, actually. Wowed to sit at the feet of a man who'd lived through, who'd made such big swaths of history. He'd been a hustler, a towel boy at the Continental Baths. In 1970, after the notorious Snake Pit raid, when one of the men arrested leapt from the precinct's second story, impaling himself on a spiked metal fence, Jim had helped to organize the protest. He had been there being a past I longed to touch, and also a feeling of life as large and urgent. I loved his self-certainty, his hunger for the world, his cheerfully lewd, give no fucks affections. He was like the socket to a source of thrumming voltage, everything I was eager to plug into. So why then? Why had I resisted? He was my mentor. I wanted him to want me for my writing. Plus, wouldn't our sleeping together have seemed too neatly plotted? The sort of cliche that Jim's own work was sometimes faulted for. But no, those are literary excuses invented later. In truth, at 23, my body smooth and slinky, my hair a potent shock of baby blonde, I simply couldn't fathom sex with any man as old as Jim, even if being sexy was his profession. 46, a year younger than I am now. The Hickman line delivered Jim's nutrition intravenously and had to be flushed with heparin daily to keep his blood from clotting. I screwed the syringe into the lumen and opened the catheter clamp. Weeks ago, when the nurse had trained me, I'd been tense with fear, less of Jim's infected blood than of the chance I'd kill him with an accidental bubble. But now, as I firmly pushed the plunger with my thumb, shooting the clear liquid toward his heart, my body throbbed with a proud, awestruck sense of competence. When all the hep was injected and I'd reclamped the catheter, I tried to read Jim's face for signs of nausea. But Jim appeared at ease. In fact, he was snoozing. Lately, he could drop asleep in the middle of a sentence. Beside him, Betty, too, had seemingly nodded off. A fat mass-market spy novel was falling from her lap. I sat there in the gloam of Jim's cloyingly stale apartment, amazed by how unamazed I was. He was the first person with AIDS I'd ever helped to care for, and when I'd started a year ago, I had expected stink and gore and sobs. But sometimes it was only this, a silent, sleepy room. Padding to the trash can with the used syringe and swabs, I was jarred by a ghoulish, hissing voice. Had it said, sorry? I spun around and there was Jim, devilishly grinning. Sorry, he hissed again, then cackled. You'll be sorry you never let me fuck you. And that's where I'll stop the story for now. Thanks to Saints and Sinners for this opportunity. It's tough not getting to see everybody in person, but that'll just make next year's event all the sweeter. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Hello, I'm Michael Nava. I'm going to be reading from a section of a new Henry Rios novel called Lies with Men. Set in Los Angeles in 1986, it involves Rios in a campaign to defeat a ballot initiative that would have allowed local health officials to quarantine people with the HIV virus. In this scene, Rios goes to the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center, where a meeting is being held to plot strategy to defeat the initiative. I turned off Highland into the parking lot of the Gay and Lesbian Community Center and nosed my car into a narrow space. I'd always suspected from its long L shape that in a previous life the center had been a hot sheet motel. Painted industrial gray, it was an unimposing building that was nonetheless constantly being vandalized with graffiti like the one I saw now in red spray paint. AIDS equals anally inserted death serum. In the main community room, a pudgy white-haired man in black-rimmed glasses and a herringbone sports coat banged a gavel on the table at the front, where he and half a dozen other men and women were sitting. All the folding chairs that had been set out in the big space were occupied, and dozens of other people were standing against the walls or sitting on the floor. It was a pretty young crowd. There were lots of black leather jackets, wallet-chained, and hemmed jean shorts, the activist wardrobe. T-shirts were emblazoned with the names of AIDS activist groups or slogans like, "How dare you presume I'm straight?" A dozen or so of the crowd, men and women, wore black T-shirts with a single word written across their chests: queer. I knew one of them, Laura Costa, She taught a gay studies course at a Los Angeles community college. At her invitation, I'd spoken to a couple of her classes about the developments of the law regarding gay rights. Not much to report there. Laura was a self-described butch dyke, her stockiness a product of power weightlifting, her hair gelled and cut into a flat top. She invariably dressed in men's khakis and a Guibera shirt. I caught her eye as the meeting started and nodded. She grinned and mouthed, "Talk later." The white-haired man at the front of the room, an old-school activist, pounded his gavel and declared, "I call this meeting to order." A tall, thin boy in a queer t-shirt jumped to his feet and shouted, "Who the fuck are you to be running things up there? We didn't elect you." The old veteran replied calmly, "I'm not in charge of anything. No decisions are going to be made here this afternoon. This is purely an informational meeting. The people up here have been tracking Proposition 54, and they want to share what they've learned. How the community responds is up to everyone in this room." "But you set up the room like you're the head honcho," the boy shouted back, "like you got the authority." There was a hurried, hushed deliberation among the people at the head table, and then the older man said, "Point taken. Why don't we get rid of the table and form a circle? That way no one's at the head of anything." I groaned. This was precisely the kind of bickering that wasted time and energy better spent in organizing against the quarantine. But like everyone else, I helped rearrange the room, shuffling chairs and bodies until we achieved a semblance of a circle. The older man, who had introduced himself as Morris Knight, again called us to order and introduced the first speaker, a young lawyer named Wendell Thorne. Thorne gave us the background of the initiative, its potential effect, quarantine camps to which people with AIDS would be forcibly removed, the worrying poll numbers, and concluded, "We have 7 months to put together a statewide coalition to defeat the proposition. And I gotta tell you, right now, it's not looking that good." Another panelist, a flame-haired woman who introduced herself as Kate Cassells, broke in, "We're also taking the fight to the courts. We're about to file a lawsuit in the state Supreme Court to try to knock 54 off the ballot because it violates the state's constitutional right to privacy by forcing people to disclose their HIV status." It was a decent argument, but the Supreme Court had an entrenched conservative majority. There was no way those ancient white men were going to side with people they doubtless considered deviants. Proposition 54 would have to be defeated at the ballot or not at all. Knight was saying, "Want to present some possible, and I emphasize possible, strategies to defeat 54. Like Wen said, the Christian right's all over this, but we're not without our allies in the church. Reverend Hester Price from St. George Episcopal has some ideas for mobilizing the Christian left." "Fuck that!" The tall, queer, t-shirted man who disrupted the proceedings earlier was on his feet again. "Who invited her? Christians, they're the enemy. They're all bigots and homophobes." The man sitting in front of me stood up and shouted back, "I'm gay, and I'm a Christian." The tall man strode toward us, got in the second man's face, and screamed, "Then you're an asshole and a traitor." He shoved the man who slammed me with such force I went over in my flimsy folding chair, smacked the back of my head on the concrete floor, and saw stars. I rolled away from the chair, touched the back of my head, and came away with blood on my fingers. Meanwhile, the meeting had dissolved into screaming voices and flailing arms. A young man's face swam into my line of vision. A moment later, he was kneeling on the floor beside me and saying, "Are you all right?" "Help me get up." "You're bleeding." "A little, from my head. I need some air." Still dazed, I staggered out of the room and slumped down on the bench outside the building. The young man reappeared, a wad of damp paper towels in his hand. "Let me look at you." I rested my chin on my chest and felt his fingers gently part my hair, then dab my skull with the paper towels. "It's not deep. There's a first aid kit inside. Don't move, I'll be right back." He returned with a metal first aid kit, again parted my hair, applied a stinging antiseptic and a band-aid to the cut. "There," he said. "You're good as new." I smiled. "Are you a doctor?" He smiled back. "Ex-Eagle Scout. My name is Josh." "I'm Henry. Thanks for coming to my rescue." I guessed he was in his early 20s. His hair was a mass of black curls restrained by shiny mousse. He had a delicate bony face, a long nose, a wide strong mouth, and a dimpled chin. It was worth the blow to my head. You're with the group? He smiled. For now, for today anyway, my roommate drafted me. He said. The tall man from Queer stomped out of the center, accompanied by a shorter but more muscular Latino, also in a Queer t-shirt. He regarded me with cool, confiding eyes as if to say, "Can you believe these gringos?" The taller man said to Josh, "Come on, we're leaving." He glared at me. "These people, they're losers." Josh said, he's the roommate I was." "Come on, Josh," he interrupted, "let's go." "I'm the one with the car," he said apologetically. He took a pen from his pants pocket, lifted my hand, and carefully wrote a telephone number on the back of it. "Call me?" "Yeah." "Promise?" "I promise." He smiled and said, "Okay, talk to you later," and went off with the Queer cohort. At the edge of the parking lot, he turned back, smiled, and waved. Thank you for inviting me to Saints and Sinners. Bye.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out the Saints and Sinners reading series. My name is Craig Rogers, and I am coming to you from my office in Madison, Wisconsin. And today we're going to read a little something from my book, The 49th Challenge, From Breakup to Wake Up and Everything in Between. What makes this book really special is that it takes you from processing your breakup and how to get over that and get back into the dating scene, which can be a little daunting at times. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to read a little story about one of my really bad dates. And the thing about bad dates is that there's always something good that can come out of it, and if you're really lucky, you'll get a couple laughs as well. So, today's story is called Date with the Needy Octopus. When Tom called to confirm our coffee date, he asked one last question, which in retrospect should have raised my eyebrow. What are your thoughts on PDA? Public displays of affection, as I told Tom, were fine. A little hand-holding while walking down the street is totally in bounds. A simple kiss after a first date is appropriate. I told Tom that when PDA inspires public feedback of "get a room," you know you've gone a little too far. Little did I know that my almost date was all hands. As I sat down with my venti dark roast, Tom leaned forward and started rubbing my arm. "Wow, you're gorgeous, even better in person," exclaimed Tom, with his hand on my left arm that went straight down to my leg. "Well, thank you, Tom, so are you," I responded, even though I was a little dumbfounded that he was now rubbing my leg. Standing at 6'4", Tom was in his mid-40s and definitely no stranger to the gym. He is a player in a local gay rugby team, and his hands were massive. As our conversation continued, Tom made it clear that he really wants a relationship. He's been single for 3 years, and he no longer wanted to be alone. He told me about a health scare he had recently experienced, and that he had to face it all by himself. Tom was tired of being a solo act. The entire time he's explaining this, Tom's hand never once left my body. An arm, an ankle, a knee, nothing remained untouched. If the NYPD dusted me for prints, I'd look like a sloppy crime scene. I knew I had to address this, and I did it the best way that I knew possible. I made a joke. "You know, Tom, I'm starting to feel like one of those radio contests. If you take your hand off me, you'll lose the chance to win the keys to a new Ford Explorer." "Oh, I'm sorry. Too much too soon. But I really like you." "And I like you too, Tom. But I want to get to know you. Let's get to know each other," I said. Tom seemed to be very cool with that. And for the first time on our date, I wasn't being petted like a dog. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. Tom repositioned himself on the banquette where we were sitting, and he asked me to lean in on him as we talked. "Tom, I'm drinking hot coffee, and we're not at home." "No," was my response. Feeling a bit deflated, he sat up, grabbed my hand, and continued the conversation. I ended the date soon after, thanking him for meeting me and telling him that it was nice to get to know him. He came in to give me a kiss, and of course, in true Tom fashion, he came in threw himself upon me, and he recreated the beach scene from the classic film From Here to Eternity. He threw me against my car and planted one on me like the Japanese bombers were moments away. 20 minutes after I got home, Tom called. He wanted to thank me for the date and to see if I'd go out with him the next day. At this point, I thanked him and told him that the chemistry just wasn't there to warrant a second date. Lesson learned. I did some reading about the mating rituals of the octopus, and I learned that my date was more like an octopus than he even knew. What Tom wanted more than anything was a relationship. Tom was in love with the idea of a permanent relationship, so much so, and getting to know a potential mate wasn't all that important. That would come in time, once the relationship was well underway. I learned that in some species of octopi, the male actually severs his mating arm and gives it to his partner, allowing her to reproduce at her discretion. Like the octopi, Tom would have cut off his own arm to have that relationship. As if the concept of instant relationship wasn't unattractive enough, the excessive PDA was just way too much to handle. It was over the top that it distracted me from getting to know anything about him. I'm sure there was a really great guy in there somewhere, but the desperation of craving a relationship, compounded with the groping, made that discovery impossible. When you're on a first date, keep in mind that nobody wants to date an octopus. It's okay to look, but spend the time getting to know your date and save the touching for another time. Most daters have their eyes on their endgame, which is, of course, a relationship. Wearing your endgame on your sleeve, or in Tom's case, his 8 sleeves, is going to pressure the individual sitting across from you. And that's the last thing you want to do on a first date. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me today. And I'm really, really grateful for Saints and Sinners to include me in their reading series. Let's all get together next year, hopefully in person, and go out and read some books.
Greetings from sunny Fort Lauderdale. I'm Gregg Shapiro, and I'm going to be reading the short story, My Mother's Vanity, from the expanded edition of my short story collection, How to Whistle, from Rattling Good Yarns Press. My Mother's Vanity. There was a mascara smear on one of the monogrammed pink hand towels. It was in the shape of a child's primitive rendering of a tree, leafless in autumn. You might think that's a lot of mascara. And it was. What made it worse was that I denied having anything to do with it. Novice liar. Who else could have done it? Did I think my mother was that oblivious? She always made sure to wipe the peach lipstick streaks from the mouthpiece after she hung up the white princess phone. I was the one who regularly forgot to do the same. I'll say this, I knew enough to stay out of her closet, away from her clothes, the bras and panties and girdles and garters, the stockings and tights, the negligees and nightgowns from Schwartz's intimate apparel held no interest. Neither did culottes, see-through and opaque blouses in silk, rayon and cotton, colorful pantsuits and jumpsuits, clam diggers, mini, midi, or maxi skirts, dresses, plaid or striped slacks, jumpers, cashmere and angora sweaters, pastel shells or patterned shifts, corduroy and denim blazers. Sure, I might slip a barefoot into a stiletto heel, a pump or strappy sandal. She had small feet. We were practically the same size. I avoided the zip-up wet-look boots in black, white, fire engine red, and sky blue. I worried about stuck zippers. I didn't want to get into something I couldn't get out of quickly. But how could I avoid her vanity? The tortoiseshell comb, the matching onyx hairbrush and hand mirror, the hair clips and pins, the clip-on bows and velvet headbands, my thick, pitch black hair a shimmering reflection of her regularly dyed coif, dark and resilient as black lacquer. Was it my artistic streak that led me to swirl fingers, brushes, and other applicators in the powdery terrains of rouge, blush, and eyeshadow? Imagine the eyelid as a canvas, a blank slate beckoning for color and contrast. Eyebrow pencils in their own murky hues, cool and damp eyeliner outlining and emphasizing. Lipstick tubes containing vaguely phallic rockets of tint and shade, iridescent and ethereal or bright and flushed. The waxy warmth caressing and coloring lips, accentuating kisses, puckers, smiles, and frowns. Every lip print tissue was stashed and trashed. No wonder they call the device used to apply mascara a wand. It contains magical powers, transforming lashes that are too short, too light, too limp, too wispy into sculpture. Even the shyest eyes command attention when lashes are darkened and dramatically drawn out, like living picture frames. The sensation of dipping the bristles into the tube and gently dragging the brush along the fine hairs is electrically charged. Next came the masking of the faintly chemical smell of the palate's potions. So many pretty bottles in such distinctive shapes. Tigress and Wood Hue by Fabergé, Jean Nete, Estee, Topaz by Avon, Halston and Jovan's Musk Oil, Pulse Points, So Little Goes Such a Long Way. Her jewelry box had a similar effect. How else to complete the process? Bangles and beads, costume jewelry and clip-on earrings, gemstones and rhinestones, pearls and plastic geometric shapes, cocktail rings and chokers, gold and silver-plated baubles, multicolored bubble watches for wrists, chains and strands, and timepieces worn as necklaces. Did I feel cute, desirable, seductive, glamorous, new each time, indestructible, older than my single-digit age? You bet I did. That time that the handsome bearded guy at the indoor flea market told me I was pretty enough to be a girl, my father went ashen. I didn't even have a lick of makeup on my face. Maybe I didn't need it after all. Maybe I just needed to stand still and be adored for my natural beauty, something on which neither my mother nor father could agree. I was the perfect blend of their facial features, skin tones, hair texture, all in miniature. They always looked at me as if they couldn't decide if that worked in my favor or theirs. One day I got careless, sloppy, reckless. One day was all it took. For someone so good at making sure that compacts click shut silently, that glass bottles never clinked, that lipstick points never dulled, that eyebrow pencils stayed sharpened and shavings were properly disposed of, that no speck of powder, no matter how pale, was left behind. I really blew it. Cold cream was involved, soap and water too, foam and scrubbing, something stinging in my eye, more warm water. The burning sensation subsided, although the blurred vision persisted, reaching for something terry cloth soft to dry and comfort, something left behind. I was watching television or reading a book. I was drawing a picture of a face, not mine, or coloring in one in a coloring book. I was making paper snowflakes or construction paper links. I was building something with Lego blocks or playing with matchbox cars when my mother called me into the bathroom and pointed to the monogrammed hand towel, now monogrammed with something else. I lied, I denied, I whined, I cried, I ranted, I recanted, I stamped my feet, I folded my arms, tears fell, snot bubbled and dripped from my nose. It tasted like perjury. What else could I do on that day but destroy the evidence? Piles of Maybelline, CoverGirl, Max Factor, Revlon, Helena Rubinstein, and Yardley products heaped in the center of my parents' king-sized bed. Every bottle of perfume poured out as an accelerant. The offending towel ignited by my father's butane lighter and dropped where it could do the most damage. I would use the ashes like coal to enhance my eyes, my best feature, blinking and blazing as the house burned down around me. That was from How to Whistle, from Rattling Good Yarns Press. I'm Gregg Shapiro, and thank you so much to Saints and Sinners for this opportunity. So grateful. Hope to see everybody live and in person in 2022.
Hi there. I'm Carrie Smith coming to you from New York City, and I'm going to read to you the first few pages of my short story, Two Sides. Just to save you a little guesswork, the story takes place in Michigan in the early 1970s. I hope you enjoy it. Two Sides. Tamisha was winning again, but I didn't care. I just wanted to keep the game going as long as I could, our bodies hunched forward and our faces so close I could feel the slight current of her breath between us as we studied the board. It was her move again, and she took her time, playing out the consequences, seeing more of the future than I ever could. Finally, she sat up tall and resolute. I followed her hand to the board. Her thumb and forefinger delicately lifted a knight, held it in the air, and set it down again. Check. I wanted those fingers to reach out to me. Did she know it? Did she feel that too? I was in the 10th grade at a private high school that, according to my father, cost a pretty penny, but would save me from being bused to the inner city if Milliken versus Bradley made it to the Supreme Court and the justices made the wrong call on cross-district integration. He and my mother now believed I was rubbing elbows with the offspring of influential Grosse Pointe families, Fords, Chryslers, Dodges. But those kids had all learned to swing their hockey sticks together in lower school. They didn't need any new friends like me, a middle-class kid with no pedigree, a wiffle ball player. I felt more at ease with Tamisha, an 11th grade scholarship student. Every day after the last bell, we went up to the second floor classroom where the chess club met. We were always the last to leave, fastened to our seats until the sky was ink black through the windows, and the only other people up there were Miss Ferguson, the old Latin teacher, and the janitors buffing the floors. Like Miss Ferguson, I guess, Tamisha and I had nowhere better to be. That September, my sister had left for college. My father had become an administrative law judge for workers' comp hearings, and my mother had been voted onto the local teachers' union bargaining committee, which meant she had meetings after her regular school day ended. Every evening, when we came home from our separate worlds, my father would say, "Where shall we eat tonight, Lo?" My mother had given up cooking. We usually ended up at one of 3 restaurants. The Elias Brothers Big Boy on the corner of Mack and 8 Mile was the closest. In the back was an all-you-can-eat salad bar that appealed to my parents. They'd gone on Weight Watchers when my father couldn't button the slacks of his favorite suit, and one day he'd come home with a physician-quality beam scale for their bedroom. We need to weigh in every day. Friar Tuck's in St. Clair Shores was another favorite. On the menu was a low-fat, soft-serve frozen dessert that carried the Weight Watchers seal of approval. My parents didn't seem to mind the funny aftertaste. Bill Cavan's Bar and Grill had dim lighting and long lines, but every so often my mother craved one of their char-broiled burgers, and my father would throw caution to the wind and order the onion rings deep-fried to golden brown. I liked the BLTs made with greasy round slices of Canadian bacon. On this Monday night, my mother said, "Cavan's." As we drove there through the November darkness, I thought of Tamisha driving home in her grandmother's beat-up Ford Falcon. Tamisha and her grandmother lived in Highland Park, far from Grosse Pointe. "How was school?" my mother asked as we waited in line to be seated. "Great," I said. "You played chess again?" I nodded. "Who's in that chess club anyway?" "Oh, lots of kids," I said, and she didn't dig any deeper. When we finally got to our table, my father leaned forward and told her, "Have I got some news?" His eyes darted to the other tables. "John Marlin is missing." John Marlin was one of my father's friends from Wayne State University Law School. "Missing?" my mother said. "What do you mean he's missing?" My father frowned. "Keep your voice down low. You never know who's listening. Use first initials." "How did you find this out?" she whispered. "Elle called my office this morning." Elle was Linda, John Marlin's wife. Until their marriage a year ago, he'd been a confirmed bachelor, according to my mother. "I don't know what he sees in that girl," my father had said when their wedding invitation arrived in our mail. "She's hardly a looker." "Oh, she's perfectly nice, Jim," said my mother. "And if you ask me, I don't know what she sees in him. He's a good 15 years older than she is." "I'll tell you what she sees. $, and a rescue from old maid status. Either that or she's got skills we don't know about. He laughed loudly. A Cavan's waitress set 3 vinyl-covered menus on the table. My father grinned up at her. "Are you our girl tonight?" Girl. I wanted to disappear. He read her name tag. "Charisse, is it, or Cheris?" "Whichever you prefer." She didn't smile. Her head cocked to one side, eyes narrowed. My mother sat through this cringy exchange with a blank expression. My father always treated waitresses as if their job gave him license to tease and flirt, but Charisse, or Cheris, was no high school girl like the waitresses at Big Boy. She was at least 30 and gave him a look that said, "I know your type." "Start you off with a drink?" she asked flatly. "Coffee for me," said my mother. "Decaf," said my father. "Make sure it's decaf. I don't want to be up all night." Charisse turned away and my mother said, "Do you think J and L had a fight?" I asked her, but she insisted everything was fine between them. I sipped my water and sucked on little chips of crushed ice, the way I'd sucked on one of Tamisha's butterscotch lifesavers during our chess game an hour ago. As I opened my menu, I pictured John Marlin's face. His cheeks were scarred with little pockmarks, and the fringe of bags across his forehead made him look like a Roman emperor. His eyes were the same blue as my grandmother's Wedgwood china. He wasn't handsome, but he was tall and striking in the expensive suits he wore to my parents' holiday parties. Tamisha was more than striking. She had dark, almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, and full lips that I couldn't stop staring at. She wore her hair in tight braids that almost came to her shoulders. She was beautiful, and I could look at her forever. "Elle must be going crazy," said my mother. "She's got the new baby, and she was up all night calling around," said my father. "Did she phone the police?" He nodded. "They wouldn't take a missing persons report until 24 hours elapsed. I helped her do it this afternoon." "What do you think could have happened?" My father rested his elbow on the table, making my water slosh. "Well, it could be related to a case," he said. "It isn't easy being an assistant prosecutor down there, you know." Down there was Detroit. "You're dealing with some really rough characters." Rough characters were Black people. But Tamisha wasn't rough. Her voice was soft. Her skin was smooth and creamy like rich hot cocoa. I'll stop there. Thanks for including me in the Saints and Sinners reading series. If you want to read the rest of the story, you can find it in this year's Saints and Sinners Fiction from the Festival anthology. Thanks for listening.